Good morning, or good afternoon, everybody that is in here on the Zoom that is coming in. Thank you for being on time. Thank you for being early. As we go ahead and get ready to get started. The review guide for this lesson is also in Google Classroom already. I posted it earlier today, like way earlier. Hopefully you guys are doing well this afternoon. Happy Monday. Last class of the day. We have kind of a lot to talk about for reasons we'll get into. So let's make sure we're ready to go. About 2 more minutes till we get started, guys. Make sure you're ready. There's no new key terms today because stuff we've already talked about. So just make sure you're ready for that. You will, the background is back. The background is back. You also probably need your not probably, you also need your notebook, at least for the first couple minutes, because I'm going to try to do something that makes sense today. So the background is back. About 2 minutes before we get started. Pearl Harbor movie, yeah. So we're going to try to talk a little bit about Pearl Harbor today, just because it makes sense, because it is going to really be in your AP exam. It's not like 9/11 where they might throw it in at the end. Like, this is going to really be in there. And it's a chance for me to talk about it twice, right? So what you should be doing is in your notebook somewhere separate, right? Be writing down the Pearl Harbor info and then save it for when we get into World War II. So you'll already have Pearl Harbor kind of done. You'll already more or less know what it is. And then when it makes sense chronologically, it's less for you to have to do then. So keep it in mind. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to try to keep it to just 10 minutes so we can get back into review. This is only going to be part 1 of the Unit 2 review. So we're really just going to talk about the main European nations, the main forms of colonization they took, and then we're going to talk about the Chesapeake region and the Massachusetts Bay region. So it'll be part 1, and then part 2 will be tomorrow. We have 5 days for like formal review in class anyways. So we'll use those appropriately. All right, guys, it is 2:25. So now I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock. And for those two, actually less than 2 minutes, I'm only going to put a minute and a half on the clock. For that minute and a half, I want you to answer that question in the chat box. Send it to me privately, not publicly. How do Native American societies form pre-European contact? So pre-contact, how are they forming? Send it privately in the chat. You have a minute and a half. Everybody should be sending it. So I should have at least, as of right now, 40 responses and more as you come in. Janessa, elaborate. Remember, guys, be a little, not so much specific, but explain it. Responses for the do now question. How do Native societies form or live pre-European contact? So remember, make sure you elaborate. How do they form? If I were to pick a Native American tribe from 1480 and started describing it, why do they live the way they do? What's the main factor? Pre-European contact. What is that factor? Emiliano, you nailed it. Brian, you nailed it. Great examples. There you go, Janessa. Good job. Jay, solid. Alex, solid. Yes, good job. Good job. Running out of time. We'll do another 30 seconds. Devin, good job. Desiree, good job. Yeah, so I'm seeing really solid responses. About 10 more seconds, fill in your response. I'm gonna start explaining it, right? So yes, pre-European contact, pre-Columbia, or pre-Columbian, right, is what they would say. Pre-European contact is how you'd also say it. Native Americans based their societies on where they lived. If you live on the coast, you fish. If you live in the Great Plains, you probably are a nomad. If you lived in a place that's really good for farming, either due to things like irrigation or due to just great soil, you farmed. So good job on that. So we have a few more, we have a little more than normal, still a little short a few, but they're late. So we're gonna get started so we don't waste time. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep this Pearl Harbor section to 10 minutes or less, preferably less. But I want to give you the context, and I figured, hey, 79th anniversary, might as well do it today. So again, you should be writing some of this in. I'll tell you which parts to write because they're dense slides. You don't need every little bit, but it's just kind of knowing what happened. A lot of us tend to think when they think Pearl Harbor, we don't really know the setting, and you're going to need this for your AP. So I figured let's talk about it twice. We'll talk about it now, then we'll get into review, and then when it comes up again later, we'll talk about it after. So with that being said, all you got to know is in 1941, the world wars have been going on, depending on who you ask, for 3 years, 2 years, 4 years. So like if you live in China, you've been fighting the World War with Japan since 1937. If you live in Great Britain, you've been fighting a world war with Germany since 1939, right? Us in the United States during that time, we're very comfortable. We weren't fighting the war. What we were doing actually was making money off of the war, right? We were making, whether it be bullets, tanks, cars, engines, clothes, anything you can think of, the United States was making it in factories, and it's what got us out of the Great Depression. People like to give FDR credit, and he deserves it, but his programs really only get as far as they get because we're making all the stuff that the warring countries need. And for the first couple of years, we're not in the war. We're just selling stuff and making money, right? And it's very clear to a lot of the Axis powers, which is Germany, Italy, and Japan, that we have favorites. We tend to sell to allied nations. We sell to Britain, and we sell to really just Britain, because by 1940, right, 41, France is gone. They were knocked out of the war, and that's the biggest shock of them all, because prior to World War II, if you take notes for this, I would recommend taking specific notes, right? So all you need to know is that at this time, the war's been going on. America's been profiting, but they haven't been fighting, right? France is gone, and France was the big powerhouse of the time. Like France losing would be like if when Mike Tyson, or not Mike Tyson, what's his name, Floyd Mayweather, and what's the other guy, the YouTube guy's name, fight, and Floyd Mayweather loses. That's what France losing is like. It's not a thing that you expected to happen. So all you got to know for this slide, because I'm going to move on already, right? The United States is profiting from the fighting nations fighting, but they are not in the war. So the nation's been at war, the world's been at war, I should say, but not the United States. They get to just sell things and make a little bit of money. In fact, specifically, Japan and Germany think that the United States is too soft to fight. This is a thing, you can find it in sources. They're like, oh, so those guys aren't gonna fight. Like they really think it. They make refrigerators, not warplanes, is what the Hermann Goering said, who's the guy that's in charge of the German Air Force. They did think wrong. They thought very wrong. Japan very famously said, all we got to do is hit them real hard and they're not going to want to fight back. We're going to discourage them. They're weak-willed. They don't have the will to fight back, right? And that's their mindset. Some of you guys are chuckling, right? That's their mindset going into this. So keep that in mind. Japan specifically thinks that United States is weak-willed. So why Pearl Harbor? It's all about strategy. Japan's whole thing, they're a tiny island. They don't have natural resources. So if you're going to fight a long war with big, strong countries, you need natural resources. So that's kind of why they start invading places like China. And Japan's whole goal is we want resources and we want to be safe. So they're going to capture islands along the Pacific. The only threat to Japan in the Pacific is the United States because of Hawaii and because of the fleet, specifically because of the fleet, because America has a bigger and stronger fleet and it's really close to where Japan is. Geographically speaking, if you look at it on this little map, you can kind of see, I don't think it shows it, but Hawaii is really close to where Japan is. So geographically speaking, the Pacific Fleet in the United States is the only threat to Japan. And the Japanese are not dumb. They know that if they get into a formal war, right, a formal war, they're going to lose it. They know they don't have the people, they don't have the size of the military. More importantly, they don't have the resources the United States does. So it goes back to that thing, right? They think Americans are kind of weak-willed. They think a big hit's enough to stop them. So where are you going to hit them? Where are you going to hit them in the fleet? You're going to attack the fleet. So that's why Pearl Harbor. That's where the entire Pacific Fleet is in the United States Navy. Now, the whole point of the attack is sink all the aircraft carriers, destroy all the repair yards, destroy all the fuel. Right? It's supposed to cripple the Navy for a long time. That's not how it goes. But the whole point is the only way we're going to win is if we win in one hit, right? A one-punch knockout. If it's not a one-punch knockout, they're not going to win. They already kind of know that, right? The same way that Germany knew it in the First World War. Like they know one-punch knockout, that's how they win. If it goes any more than that, if it goes into the second round, it's over. They will lose it the longer it goes. Make sense? Make sense? Hopefully. So that's why Pearl Harbor. Destroy the fleet. That's the one punch. They think they can do it. They intentionally wanted to destroy the fleet. It's not about killing soldiers, it's about destroying the fleet. Aircraft carriers specifically, because Japan's the only country at the time that knows aircraft carriers are the thing. They're the thing that's going to win the war, like naval fights. They know that battleships aren't a thing anymore. Like they're not as important. They know that because they were beating up the British and all they were doing was using aircraft to sink like super, super expensive British battleships. Like they know that it's not about battleships anymore. So they're looking for aircraft carriers. Japan's the only country that knows that right now. Everybody else will figure it out, but they're the only ones that know it. So they're a little ahead of the curve there. So then they attack. It's a surprise attack, December 7th. You guys already kind of know this, right? Targets aircraft carriers, fuel, repair stations. Now here's the problem. They don't hit any aircraft carriers. I think they only hit one fuel station, and they don't hit any of the repair stations. So they don't hit anything they were targeting for. They did a lot of damage. They destroyed a lot of aircraft. They destroyed a lot of battleships and a lot of destroyers. So a lot of boats that are ships, I should say, that are basically on the verge of obsolete. They're not really relevant to fighting a war anymore. Aircraft carriers are. They did this mainly with torpedo bombers because they had really good torpedoes that could go into the shallow water. It's a real technological marvel. For example, the Americans can't make torpedoes save their lives. In fact, American torpedo bombers all kept dying. It was dive bombers that did it. But so all you got to know, the attack doesn't work. Militarily speaking, it's a failure. It does a lot of damage. It's a really bad punch. But even Japan knows, damn it, all we did was piss off the United States. And then what Germany goes and does is declare war on the United States the next day. For some reason, no one knows why. But America's mad at Japan, and then Germany declares war on America. So now we're fighting everybody. So that's how America gets into the war with Germany, because Germany declares war on the United States. Something not everybody knows. Like slapping a bull, it kind of is, right? And so then to that last slide. Again, it was a target. It was the one punch to try to win the fight, but it doesn't work. It does not work. It's a failure. And the last result, and this is the guy that planned Pearl Harbor, by the way. I fear all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fail him a terrible result. That's all that happens, right? All they did was anger the United States. And it sounds horrible because people died, and it's a very serious thing. But when I say militarily or strategically speaking, they didn't do the damage they wanted to do. All they did was kill a bunch of people. That's not to say that's a light thing, right? That's not to say it shouldn't hurt. I know people who know people and all this stuff, right? It's a horrible thing. But militarily speaking, it's not the punch. It's like you landed the really big punch, but it was in the stomach, not in the face. And the boxer's fine, and he made it to the second round. And now he's really, really mad because he hit him in the stomach real hard and it hurt. That's kind of what happens. That's what Pearl Harbor does to the United States and brings them into the war. And again, Germany, who's not in a great place, because by this point, their invasion of the Soviet Union isn't going well. I'm pointing at a map, like if there's a map here, there's nothing here. But they declare war too, and now all those three Axis countries have to deal with the United States. And unlike what they think, the United States is really good at making war materials. And they have a resolve that they didn't have before. They didn't have it in the First World War. They haven't had a resolve like this probably since the Spanish-American War, and that lasted like 2 weeks. America won that one, and we'll talk about that one later. But they haven't had a reason to fight anybody in a long time, and now Japan gives them one. So we're going to change gears. Just wanted to give you the context. We're going to change gears. We will get back to this at some point, and we're going to get into review. So now we're going to talk about colonization. So this is where your review guide comes in. It's a very short review guide. At least he knew he did know, yeah. Yeah, he knew he messed up. He knew that the whole point of this is sink carriers. In fact, speaking of aircraft carriers, the reason Japan will kind of lose the Pacific is because they lose all their carriers in a day. They made a movie recently, Woody Harrelson, what's the movie called? I think it's called Midway. It's not a great movie, but it's okay. But that's when Japan loses the war too. They lose all their carriers in a day. No carriers, you can't fight a war. I pictures. Oh God, yeah, yeah. Well, the fun part is Congress right away. Like that's why I like that newspaper article of U.S. declares war on Japan, because like the next day, like that night, Congress was like, all right, let's go to war. Let's do it. We're ready. All right. It's pretty interesting. All right. So hopefully we're ready to go. Now is where you get into your review guide, right? So those of you who didn't, I'm not going to pull it up, but the review guide is basically just charts, because we're just covering the first part. We're going to talk about the different nations and how they colonize. So that's all we're doing for the first part. I know I've been talking a lot, but now we're going to get into this. So Spanish colonization, right? The Spanish are looking for conquest, profit, and converting natives to Catholicism, right? That's all the Spanish really want with their New World endeavors, right? All they're looking for are those three things. That's what they're mainly after. Now, they get huge chunks of land in what's known as New Spain, right? Large numbers of settlers in some areas, not in all of them. Horrible treatment of the native population. Those are all ways you could describe Spanish settlement, Spanish colonization. Labor systems, plantations, specifically sugar cane, slavery, disease, and a major dedication to conversion, right? Converting natives to Catholicism, influenced Spanish colonization. What are those two labor systems again? Somebody put them in the chat or shout them out loud. What are those two labor systems called? There's two systems that the Spanish had. There we go, I see them in chat. Haciendo and encomienda, right? What's the difference? Encomienda does what? Who does it rely on, or what does it rely on? Natives. And what did those rude, inconsiderate natives have a habit of doing while they were being enslaved? They would run or they would die, right? And that's just rude, right? You can't have your slaves running and dying. So then they go to the other system, which relies on what? Or on who? The asiento system. Who's it rely on? African slaves, right? They rely on they import African slaves because they tend to not die and they don't know where to escape to. So that's where it goes to. So I'll leave this slide up for about 2 minutes, and you've got a box there, right? That's Spain on your review guide, or if you're just taking notes, this would be just the Spain section, right? It's gonna be one slide, the generalization of their colonization efforts. So if you're reading a source and it's a native, and the native is, say, from the Southwest region of North America, and they're talking about how horrible the Europeans that they met are, good chance they're talking about the Spanish, right? Whereas if you're hearing a source and it's about how great the Europeans are, probably not Spanish. Where might they be from? It's a European treating natives really good. Or really well, I should say. Or at least a European that, yeah, there you go, French, right? The French, that the natives aren't like angry with. French, good. We'll get to them next. I'll give you about 2.5 minutes on here. If you need more time than that, let me know. Again, I just want to point out, I totally kept it under 10 minutes, I think, for the Pearl Harbor thing, so I'm really proud of myself. We just want to be, that's basically what the French did, though. Mutual benefit, right? It's one of the only, actually it is really the only European nation that if you ask the natives, they would probably tell you we both benefited evenly. A lot of the Europeans will say that they both benefited evenly, but it's the French are, I say probably because, you know, it's hard to say, are probably the only ones who actually benefited evenly because they were giving up something they didn't really care about, beavers, and they were getting back like iron tools, cookware, guns, horses, right? Things that they actually liked and wanted to use. And there weren't a bunch of French people taking their land because it was just very few. So the French, I would say, yeah, definitely, probably the only positive ones. There's bursts of positivity with like the English, but it doesn't last because too many English people keep showing up. And that burst will fade as people get old and die, chiefs and, you know, leaders and so on. So it will not last in other places. But with the French, it tends to last. About a minute left on this slide. So again, if you need more time, let me know. About a minute here. Spanish colonization. Next slide is going to be the French in about 30 seconds. We're going to get into some specifics. Quick detail on the French might want to know is that the first city colony that they found is Quebec in what would be Canada. So Quebec, Canada. Don't worry about spelling it. I don't even think I wrote it in the slide, but you might want to add like Quebec, Canada is the name of the first French colony, which we're going to get into right now. Whoop, I did something. I messed it up. There we go. There we go. All right, it's back. So the first thing for France that you got to write in your box or type out or write in your notes. The French were interested in trade, not conquest, not settlement, not conversion, fur coats. Basically, they were interested in trade. That's what they were after. That's all the French wanted. That's all the French government wanted. That's really all the French people wanted. They didn't care about living there. Relatively few. Now, relatively is really important, and I recommend you use it. And if you're going to write, if this is ever going to come up like in an LEQ or an SAQ or anything, put relatively. Don't speak like if you know for a fact and you have the numbers in front of you, right? Because relatively speaking, there's a very small number of French people showing up when you compare to Spain and England. Relatively speaking, it's a very small number. We don't have specific numbers, and if I brought out specific numbers, they're probably still looking too much. There's probably still too many, right? But comparing to Spain, comparing to England, the numbers are relatively small. How many French settlers are there? Yeah, you probably did. Yeah, Eric, your French code is probably or your fur coat is probably a result of French fur trappers. So another thing to point out about the French that didn't happen with other European groups. Some of the traders and trappers married into native tribes. Now, the reason they got married to some of these native women is to cement and further improve trade relationships. That's the whole reason they're doing it. But it works, and it makes the relationship between the French and the natives mutually beneficial, right? I'm kind of blocking it, but like you see, like cookware, guns, horses, and that's stuff that the French gave to the natives, and all the French really wanted is furs and access to trade routes. And when they say access, they just mean, hey, please don't kill us while we're trading furs, and that's pretty much it. You never love them so fake. Yeah, it's kind of. Sacagawea, her husband was a fur trapper, French fur trapper, for example. It's not to say that who am I to know, right? Who are we to know if there was any real love there? But it's definitely the reason why. Definitely the reason is for trade relations. That's just the nature of the thing. That's what it was for. That's why the French wanted to do it. It helps them out. But again, I can't stress enough. French, I think good vibes for the most part. Good vibes with the natives. Very rarely were the natives angry. In fact, when the French and Indian War happens, that's why the natives are all fighting with the French. They don't really like the British. They're trying to kick the British out. Doesn't work for them, and it gets worse afterwards. But they're fighting for the French. They're like, yeah, these guys, they can stick around. Didn't work out too well. Yeah, no, it's Sacagawea, I believe, not Wea. But I mean, it's, you know, when you get into pronouncing native names, don't even get me started. I'll miss, like all the Cherokee names, when you get into the Indian removal stuff, it gets rough. So about another minute or so on here. We don't need too much time. It's not a lot of information on the French, right? Again, the big thing about the French, trade relationships, fur trappers, small numbers compared. That's all they want. They don't want to do the other stuff. They could care less. They could care less. That's why the Louisiana Territory is so empty when Americans get there, because it was owned by the French, and the French sent like 12 people in there. I mean, I'm exaggerating. It's not really 12 people, but there's nobody there. There's no settlements. That's why it's all wild. It's all still it's practically still native land, even though it was claimed by the French. All right, so about 40 seconds. Actually, not 30. Sorry, I lied. Need more time than that, let me know. We'll go to move on afterwards. So we talked about the Spanish. We talked about the French. Who are we talking about next? Someone put it in the chat. What's the next nation? Where is it? Here it is. So we're talking about the Dutch, not the English yet. You can't forget the Dutch. Everybody forgets about the Dutch. Don't forget about them. Yeah, pretty much. That's right. Hey, gun, fur, yeah, all right, trade, pretty much. So don't forget about the Dutch. It says England on the paper. The Dutch are in there too, not Dutch Vanderlyn. So the Dutch, the nation state, were Protestants, kind of like the English, but they don't care about converting to Christianity. They're like, you know, they're like Christmas, Easter Christians. They go to church on Christmas and Easter, then they kind of ignore the rest of the time. They're not super religious. They're not interested in converting natives. Much like the French, their goals were economic. But unlike the French, they're not interested in like getting into the wilderness and talking to natives, because, you know, they're not into that. They're more interested in setting up a trade in the region. So what do? They found a colony known as New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam looks in a very familiar place, right? And New Amsterdam is a hub for trade in the region, and it will be for years and years and years. The Dutch should not come in the same numbers as the British. This is really their only holding, New Amsterdam. And eventually, New Amsterdam will become New York. New York is New Amsterdam, but it was founded by the Dutch, and it was founded on the principle of trade. And the reason that it ends up changing hands is because the people living there are not happy with their government, because their government isn't helping them out. The people living there just want to keep making money. And the English settlers are like, hey, you want to make money with us? And the Dutch are like, yeah, we can do. And so that's where that comes from. And that's basically what happens, is it's mutually beneficial to all of the regions if they all just become English. And that's why New Amsterdam becomes New England. But you can't forget about them, because everybody does. And don't do that to New Amsterdam. So it's that's pretty much how it happens. Like, the king's kind of like, this can be ours now? Yeah, okay, cool. And the Dutch can't do anything about it. It's a tiny little country. They can't hold it. There's no like fighting or anything, but it's just like they can't control it, and they lose it. It's kind of like the same way that later on, Andrew Jackson in the United States is going to threaten Spain, right? They're going to kind of be like, give us Florida and back off. And Spain's going to be like, okay, but don't take anything else. Promise? And America's like, sure. And that's why, right? And then eventually when Spain loses that to Mexico, then America's going to go and take it from Mexico. But it's the same kind of thing where the Dutch know they can't hold it. So when Britain takes it, they're kind of like, hey, that's okay. And they just let it happen. There's nothing they can do about it. And they're not interested in colonies and all that. Colonies is a big boy game, and the Dutch are not on that level. By the time you get to the 1680s, 1700, England, France, Spain, that's kind of it. And Spain can barely do it. Spain really isn't as strong anymore, but they were strong early on, which is why they have so much. So yeah, colonies are a big boy game. So the Dutch are going to fall out of it. But again, all about that trade. So a quick minute and a half. Make sure you mark down the Dutch. You need to mark down the Dutch. Actually, a quick minute. You don't need a minute and a half. And then we're going to get, now it's the English. English come up next. Does it really say England on paper? It shouldn't. So about 40 seconds. Oh yeah, it does say England first. My bad, guys. It should have said the Dutch first. My bad on there. Still, at least they're in there. I thought I had left them out completely. That would have been horrible. I would have forgotten the Dutch after telling y'all not to forget them. But I didn't. I remembered them. So it's basically English took the Dutch's lunch money. Yeah, pretty much. England kind of took the Dutch's lunch money. But it kind of, okay, sort of, but imagine that the Dutch people that are in New Amsterdam, they want to be English because they see that the English colonies have like all this support, all this help, and it's really awesome. And they make all this money. And it's kind of like, you know, don't think that the people in New Amsterdam didn't want to be English. They all basically decide to be English, and England isn't about to tell them no because it's the biggest trade hub in the region. That makes sense? It's not so much that it's not, again, it's not a violent thing. It's a very like consensual thing. Everybody's into it, except for maybe the government and the king in the Netherlands over there, but it's not, you know, who cares? That's the guy whose lunch money's getting taken. All right, so let's move forward. Let's talk about the English. So a big part of why English settlers are going to be leaving is because England is a mess economically during this time. There's a lot of inflation and there's no free available land for regular people. And the new world is opportunity and land, literally. It's economic opportunity and it's literally free land. And that entices a lot of people, wealthy and poor. And the British are interested in settling in this territory. They want to live there. At least a lot of them do. They want money. They're looking to settle and they're looking for profit. Looking to settle and they're looking for profit. They don't really care about converting, but they're looking for settlement and they're looking for profit. I'll give you about a little less than 2 minutes on here. It shouldn't be too much, but again, settlement, profit, and just point out that in Britain, the economy is kind of a mess. A lot of inflation. And if you don't know what inflation is when your money is worth less because you can't buy as much with it because there's so much. Your money's worth less than it used to be. So if, I don't know, $60 used to buy a video game, now you need 120. That's inflation. Same video game, same thing, but it costs way more. That's inflation. If my mouse here that comes out was $10 on Amazon, now in American dollars, that's 20. That's inflation. Right, it's things costing more, even though they're the same thing and they shouldn't cost more. Your money is worth less. For example, I have an uncle that used to tell me stories when he was in Iraq, like at the height of the war in 2003. There'd be people with wheelbarrows full of Iraqi money because the government had collapsed, and they were trying to buy loaves of bread. And it was a whole wheelbarrow full of money, like, here, buy this bread, like to buy a loaf of bread. That's inflation. That's inflation at its worst because that whole government had collapsed, right? But that's inflation. Same money. Yesterday it was fine. Today it's not. But slow it down a little bit. Point is, yes, that's pretty much what happened in the natives. And again, a lot of this is due to disease. If disease hadn't spread the way it had, you never get to see. I always say this, and I always argue this, and I think it's true. You never get to see natives fighting at their best against European or American later encroachment. You see pieces of it, and you see what it could have looked like in key events and key battles. Some of them we'll talk about, some of them we won't. But you'll never see them fighting at full mass. You'll never get that. In the ancient world, you saw that all the time. You saw that against people like Romans all the time. You saw that against, You didn't see it against the Mongols. The Mongols fought civilized people. But you get what I'm saying. You saw like, hey, this is our best punch versus your best punch. The natives never got to give their best punch. One, they're all separated. Two, even as separated, they're all decimated by disease. So they never got to give it. So let's move forward. Almost done, guys. Now we're getting into the next chart. So the next chart on the bottom is specifically the Chesapeake region, which is Virginia. It's Virginia. It's Jamestown, but it's the Chesapeake region. I think I didn't tell you this the first time we went around. So put Chesapeake region. Know that. Chesapeake region, they're talking about Virginia. They're talking about Jamestown. And it was founded in 1607, right, by the Virginia Company, which is a joint stock company. Jamestown's main goal is profit. I'm going to say it again. Jamestown's main goal is profit. Main goal is profit. Because of that, they're not prepared to settle and form a colony, and things don't go well initially. The starving times, which happened in the early years of the colony, about half the settlers died. Some of them resorted to cannibalism. It was rough. But in 1612, a guy named John Rolfe will figure out how to cultivate tobacco in the region, and tobacco saves the colony. So you need John Rolfe, tobacco saves colony. You need Jamestown, 1607, joint stock company for profit. Chesapeake region. We're not quite done with this region yet, so keep that box. You need one more slide of info. But that's the Chesapeake region. My picture is kind of blocking starving times image, but it's there. You can kind of see it, just like dead people and cannibals and stuff. And know that map. That's a good map of, this is the Chesapeake region. This map right here, the one that's above me. Where's my hand? The one that my hand's being blocked by now. That little water bay, I think it says it in there, Chesapeake. That's the Chesapeake. So just know that Chesapeake region is Virginia. It's that little piece of Virginia. Jamestown is in there. It's also like underneath Maryland. About a minute and a half. We're almost done. Then we got our exit tickets. Actually about, a little more than a minute and a half. Got to get the date, 1607, super important. First first English colony in the New World, Jamestown. First successful one, Jamestown, 1607. Yeah, tobacco very early on is the cash crop. And it's why Jamestown survives. It's also why the Southern planter class will form. Who would have thought? Yep. But yeah, so tobacco saves that colony. That colony would never have succeeded because it was founded by a bunch of people who didn't know how to found a colony. Right? If you remember, these are like it's the gentleman class. It's not like the working class. And they show up and they're like, all right, we're here. And they brought stuff to find gold, and they didn't bring anything else. They didn't bring much clothes for the winter. They didn't bring a lot of extra food because they're like, yeah, we'll buy it with all this gold we find, not realizing that we're in the middle of nowhere. And not only that, they didn't even find any gold. There's no gold there. But they think it's this, bad minds. Because again, their whole thing is profit, 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 profit. They don't find any until John Rolfe brings tobacco. And their profit is tobacco. And it's what saves the colony. Also what starts that little seed of what will be like the planter class. Right, like those antebellum Southerners that are like, and they sell cotton, and they start the Civil War. Those people's great granddads are right here, right now. They're the people that are going to get these huge tobacco plantations. And then in the 1790s, they're the people that are going to change the cotton, because cotton's worth more money because of cotton gin. Right, that's my cotton gin. That's my hand cotton gin. But that's where it comes from. Some of them use tobacco, yeah, probably more smoking it than chewing it, I think. Some of them, Alex, but I couldn't give you like specifics of like which ones, because that's kind of, the natives don't write stuff down, so it's hard to track their history. It's kind of like Viking history. Like, that's like, I always roll my eyes when people start talking to me about Viking history, because they're talking about the TV show and not about history. Because if you're talking about the history, there's no like specifics of dates, because Vikings didn't write anything down. Neither do natives. Like, they don't write anything down until way later, and it's only the Cherokee because they write their language down. So it's hard to give you specifics like that, but I can tell you it most certainly happened. And you know that from oral history, what's called oral history, right? Like stories being passed down, not so much written records. So like so hopefully that answers your question a little bit, Alex. Kind of is kind of the answer. All right, so now more of the Chesapeake. Early tobacco relies on indentured servants, right? And if you don't remember indentured servants, then write it again, right? Indentured servants, people who can't afford to travel to the New World. So they sign a labor contract, they work for 7 years, they get to go to the New World. Then when their contract's up, they're free, right? It's not quite slavery, it's indentured servitude. And usually when the indentured servants were free, they got like a little bit of money, maybe some land. All right, bye. And the indentured servants always tended to live outside of the colony, right? So you can't see my board back here because it's blocked because I'm in floaty head mode. But just imagine the colonies in one place, and right outside of it's where all the indentured servants live, like right outside the wall. They don't really want to be around the people who they kind of were on paper written slaves to for 7 years. They don't want to see those people. So they go do their own thing outside of the wall, and they have their farms, and they're trying to live. But the problem is, as years go on, more and more Europeans start showing up. Who's that going to upset? Who does more and more Europeans showing up upset? Which group? The natives, right? It upsets the natives, and because it upsets the natives, they start raiding these farms. Now, if you're a native and you're going to raid a farm, are you going to try to go climb the wall and raid the one behind the wall? Or are you just going to raid the one that's right outside that's by itself? You're going to raid the easy one, right? And so they're raiding these former indentured servants' farms, and the indentured servants are like, hey, can we send some soldiers here to help us out? And the governor, whose name is Berkeley, I believe, is like, nah, not going to do that. Kind of don't care, right? They're not raiding my farm. What do I care? That's the governor's mindset. So then you get the event Bacon's Rebellion. This is worth writing down, right? Bacon's Rebellion is really important. It is a revolt against the governor of Jamestown. If you can see on that image, right, a bunch of cities are burned. It's a bunch of buildings are burned, I should say. Bacon and his followers were former indentured servants that were freed, that were upset with the government, and so they revolted. Now, the revolt isn't successful, right? Berkeley wins, the Bacon and his people are captured. But the wealthy landowners start getting really, really nervous with indentured servants because you're inviting, militant freed people to live next to you afterwards when it's done. It's not as reliable a source of labor as they wished it could be. So what are they going to shift to? What are they going to start using instead? Chat, what do you got? Who are they going to start using instead? Slaves, right? African slaves. So much like in Spain, where instead of all those natives keep dying, right? In the English colonies, it's more these indentured servants keep like wanting rights and stuff, and they're not happy about it. So they switch to African slaves who they do not have to let out of a contract afterwards. In fact, some of the very early, like first slaves on that ship in 1619, and we talked about it when we talked about this, were indentured servants, but they were never released from their contracts because they were African slaves. And then that's where the slave trade kind of comes from. Yes, the slave trade, right? So the slave trade is going to grow out of this. And you're going to see more and more of it in Virginia and in the Chesapeake region, because that's where all the plantations, tobacco plantations initially. Just like how you'll see a lot of it in South America, which is where all the sugar plantations are, right? And in the Caribbean and all those little islands that the French and the Spanish own. So slavery comes as a result of Bacon's Rebellion. So it's Bacon's fault. Not quite, it's more than that, I'm just kidding. But Bacon's Rebellion is a big reason why wealthy landowners will start relying on African slaves. So make sure you have that in there, that's important, and that's a big defining moment in the Chesapeake region. So I'll give you about a minute and a half to get, or 2 minutes, because it's a lot of info, to get that in there. Again, if you don't remember indentured servant, if me reminding you and you're like, oh, that's right, write it again, because it'll be in there, I promise, you'll see it somewhere. You gotta remember that stuff. And again, tobacco saved Jamestown, can't stress that enough. And this whole thing is the Chesapeake region, that Virginia section. Does anybody remember the first ship, where it was from that brought slaves? Because it wasn't an English ship. The first slaves that came into the United States, or came into Virginia, what will be the United States. It wasn't Spanish. I believe it was a Dutch ship. In fact, I'm going to double check my slides from when we first talked about this, but I believe it was a Dutch ship. So while you're getting that in there, because I forgot the name of the ship too, which is also why I'm checking. Oh, it's from the Netherlands. So they were captured from a Portuguese slave ship known as the Netherlands. So it's a Portuguese slave ship that was captured from, that was a Netherlands ship that captured slaves off a Portuguese slave ship. That's a mouthful. So just know it wasn't an English ship. It was from the Netherlands and the Portuguese. And it arrives and it was 20 servants, right? And what's the name of the ship? Did I not put the name of the ship in the slide? And I'm killing myself here. I'm shooting myself in the foot, not putting the name. Yeah, sorry guys, I did not get the name. You guys are gonna have to check it. The White Lion. Yeah, the White Lion. Yeah, so I apologize for that. It was the yeah, so it was Portuguese slavers on a Netherlands ship, the White Lion, I believe. That doesn't sound right. I'll have it for y'all tomorrow because I'm downing myself. My slides are all messed up from September, whenever it is we talked about this. So let's move forward. Let's get into the next region. I'm sure you guys know already, right? The Massachusetts Bay Colony, right? Massachusetts Bay, right here. This is the bay, Massachusetts Bay. Oh, you can't see the mouse cursor, right? It's like right up there in that region. It's founded by pilgrims, not a company. Their whole job, their whole goal, right, is to form a new society. They're not there for profit. They're not there for conversion. They're there to build their new world, right? Live a new life, be happy. So unlike the Jamestown settlers, they are prepared for settlement. They brought winter clothes. They brought tools. They brought things they might need. Now, the problem is that didn't really work out, and the winter kind of sucks, and they're in Massachusetts, and it didn't go great for them. But they were more prepared than the Jamestown people. I like to think that if the Jamestown people showed up in Plymouth, they'd all have froze to death the first winter. These people didn't. And on top of that, being as religious as they were, these pilgrims, right, because they're pilgrims, they're kind of cool to the natives. They're nice to the natives. The natives are kind of nice to them. Part of it's because they meet an English-speaking native that was sent to Europe and then sent back and all this stuff. So that's part of it also. But the colonists get help from the natives of their land. This is where Thanksgiving comes from, right? The idea that they get help and everything's cool, and that it's not till more Europeans arrive that tensions rise. In the early years, everybody's happy with one another. The natives showed the Europeans how to cultivate the three sisters, like maize and all that stuff. And again, guns, horses, and all that fun stuff. Mental note, special point that you need to write in the Mayflower Compact, first form of self-government, 1620, Pilgrims, Mayflower Compact. Hey, we are going to govern ourselves because we're far away and we need rules. Pretty much it. Make sure you point that out. That's important. If you get any of these representative government questions, or like you can get it, for example, this could be an LEQ where it's explain how the American colonies started to separate from English rule, right? Your background knowledge, your contextualization, or your historical context. Well, hey, it started in 1620. When they first got here, they had to make rules. And they weren't the king's rules, it was their rules, because the king won there, right? That could be your setup. So it's important to just keep in mind 1620 government, because that's where it starts. Self-government, I should say. And of course, self-government is governing yourself. So about 2 minutes. And then we'll move on. About a minute left. If you need more time than that, let me know. Almost done, guys. One more slide, and then we'll get into the exit ticket. Exit ticket's pretty easy peasy today, I like to think. But don't slack on it, because I want you to think about it. It's kind of a to see where you're at. By the way, if you haven't done those old exit tickets, the ones that were standalone, and you get a 0 in Google Classroom and you want to redo it, send me a message on Teams. I'll send it back to you and you can redo it. But those grades are going to be going out these next few days. And if you turn it in, you'll get a grade with feedback. But if you didn't turn it in, you're just going to get 0. Google. So let me know on Teams if you get that 0 and you're like, uh-oh. And if you're one of those that's sitting there and you're writing notes and you're like, oh, I'm going to get a 0. I didn't turn in my exit ticket. Turn it in. This is Massachusetts Bay, this map area. This is in your review guide. It's on the bottom. It's the name of the region, Massachusetts Bay. The other one, Chesapeake. All right, so time is up. Last thing about Massachusetts Bay, I mean, for that good. They were founded by Puritans, right? Puritans, pure Christianity, right? That's the whole goal, right? They want to escape England and create a new church and a new society based on pure Christianity. They're the group that wants religious freedom but doesn't give it to other people, right? They're extremists. They think the Anglican church is corrupt and not pure enough. They're not good enough Christians. We're going to be better. Those are Puritans. They're the ones that will take over Massachusetts Bay Colony. Again, they're extremists. They don't tolerate other religions. They have really strict religious-based laws. These are the people that were pressing people to death for being witches, right? These are the people that would crush young women with rocks because they thought they were witches. That's pressing. They would put one rock at a time until you couldn't breathe anymore. So these are the extremists. These people are intense. So, and in fact, and this is something to point out, colonies like New Hampshire and Rhode Island will be founded by people who were either sent away or who didn't want to live in Massachusetts Bay because that's where all the crazy Puritans lived. So keep that in mind. And a lot of rules in that region, like that are religious based, like teaching the Bible and stuff that was in the rules for a really long time, like the 1900s, are on there because of Puritans, because Puritans are really extreme. So just know Massachusetts Bay, unlike the gentlemen and the businessmen that founded Jamestown that were looking for profit that all starved to death, these are all families, but they're all really extreme Puritans, really extreme Protestants. They have really strong beliefs, really strict. They have really strict rules. And this is it for notes. Now, there is a question in your guide at the end that we will talk about after the 2 minutes are up, and then I'll show you your exit ticket. So you shouldn't be leaving yet because we still have one more bit on your guides, on your review guides, and then we're going to talk about the exit ticket. So about a minute and a half. About 40 seconds. If you need more time than that, let me know. But just enough time to close out the review guide, part 1. Again, that's part 1. We'll have part 2 tomorrow. And then we'll probably do part 2, and then we'll get into unit 3. So, but we will keep reviewing. I will have, for those of you that are interested in getting all of the review guides at once, I should have them all done through unit 5 tomorrow. So like, if you want them all and you don't have a printer and you want them on paper, by tomorrow they'll all be done. So reach out to me and I'll try to see if there's a way we can get them to you, whether that's driving by the school real quick or sending them with somebody that you know that comes to school, something. We'll figure it out. But if you want them on paper, I don't think many of you do because they're all digital. They're all available digitally. But if you want them on paper, a physical copy, Tomorrow they should all be done, so let me know through Teams and we'll figure something out. Or if you have a printer, just print them at home. All right, so before we get into the exit ticket, what is on the chat box? Put this in. This is the last thing on your review guide. What is the biggest difference between Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Chesapeake Bay colonies? What's the biggest difference between the two? Not quite. They both set up their own self-government. What's the biggest difference about the founding of the two colonies, Massachusetts Bay and Chesapeake Bay? Shouldn't I say elaborate? Yes, but what? So one is for profit and the other's for society, right? One's trying to build a society, the other's trying to find profit. Profit, society, that's the difference. One's for profit, one's for society. That's the biggest difference, is like literally the fundamental reason why they were founded. So let me share my screen really quick. Floating head is gone for a second. So we got that. Oh, by the way, guys, if you need other help for reviewing, you guys know Heimler already. I know Nina showed you Heimler. This guy's he's like practically on par with us. He just did his Civil War video. So, you know, if you need another voice on history, somebody that's probably funnier and way more edited than I am, check that out. So your exit ticket, guys, it's already in Google Classroom. It's a Google form. It's a really quick quiz. Two things about this before I let you loose to take it. It is all multiple choice, and if you notice, if you recognize this, it's because it's what will be on the 11th grade history star. Now, here's the fun part. We haven't started covering star cheeks yet in this class because your star is all about the second half of this class. It's all about January to March. So it's really easy. These are easy questions. When I read these questions, I couldn't believe they were going to give you 4 hours to answer 50 of these because you guys are used to a minute a question, right? So you should have, but here's the thing. We haven't actually covered this information yet. It's stuff that you should know. It's stuff that everybody in this call should be able to answer because it's all stuff that, using what we have learned, you should be able to figure out. Now, there's 2 Pearl Harbor questions there that you better know because we literally just talked about. But the other 3 are things from the Gilded Age that we've talked about indirectly. That process of elimination, using your logic, using those AP brain, you should be able to answer. I'd rather have these in AP questions. Yeah, so would I. But these are really easy. That's why you'd rather have them, I think, because they're easy questions. AP questions are a little hard. So it's a Google form. It'll give you your grade when you're done. It'll tell you which ones you missed. It's already set. So it shouldn't take you more than the 5 minutes that are left. Go in, finish that, and you're good to go. And if you miss one of the older ones that are standalone, that are SAQs, or that are the AP Classroom, let me know. All right, guys. So that is it. Make sure you get your exit ticket done. That is all I got for you today.